Welcome, everyone, to Forum Friday. On Forum Fridays, we will talk about what's happening over at the Bakerpedia forums. Okay, so there is currently quite a bit of activity over there, and I want to make sure that all of you know that you are all welcome to our forum to post your questions, to ask for help, to seek items for sale or to sell. Okay, so we are currently building a community around there so that we can find you as much help as you need. Joining me today is Mark. Hi, Mark. How are you doing? Let me get you on here. There you go. Mark, what is Yeah, if those of you who don't know Mark Flarkey, he is currently our community manager over at the forum. So he's the one that handles all the incoming questions and see if he can get the users more help. So, Mark, you are a seasoned baker, and you have been working for a long time in the baking industry, over 25 years at ADM. Is that right? So you've done a lot of the applications parts of product development, and you have experienced a lot of different innovations on that end, right? Yeah. So these questions that you see coming up on the forums, are they unusual or it's just very typical? Right. Came to the right place. And what's your opinion in that, Mark? Mhm. Right, but why put the eggs in the sponge though, Mark? That's true. Yeah. Plus, the more water you put into the sponge side, the better it gets to mature the dough a little more. Right, right. Right. That's an interesting discussion happening over at the Bigpedium forums. And if you have any more questions on brioche, let's just join us there and let's talk about it a little bit more. There was an interesting cookie question. Can you talk a little bit more about the cookie question that was posted on there? Oh, while Mark does that, we'll talk a little bit more about another topic that really sounded interesting to me because I had no um, experience or expertise in talking about cell elongation. And there was this guy asking about cell elongation, and I just want to say that we're so lucky to have our sponsors on there as well, because people like Stephen Pike just chimed in and told the person what you need to look for and how you need to, what you need to do to get it there. So that's just an example of how the community is coming together to help solve one person's problem, and hopefully Stephen will get some form of a business out of that. I think it's the one that was a paler cookie. There was a discussion on paler cookie. Yeah. I saw one that says that asked about why does my cookie pale over shelf life. I think that was posted. And so I really do have one comment about that. Yeah, I do have one comment on that. So um over shelf life, cookies tend to do two things. It either get darker or it either gets paler. It really depends on your formulation and what you have in the formulation. Um, a lot of hang on, I just need to. Interesting. Oh, I need to mute myself. Apparently, people couldn't hear you. And I just turned you on. So sorry about that. I am still trying to figure out the social life platform because it is very difficult to figure out when there are more than one person in here. I can never know if really. That's weird. Okay, how about this?
Now I'm live. Yes,
How do you know that?
it says live right here. I'm not that smart, Lynn. Don't give me, don't
We
give me
should
too much
make
credit.
clear, I am like terrible at this. So, one of the reasons why I bought into this platform is really I thought it's gonna help us with the communication issue quite a bit. But I feel like it's more of a challenge sometimes with technology than it is of a help. And I'm not going to even give up on it. But I hope everyone understands that it's something that I'm working to be better at. And since we really missed the first part of you talking, Mark,
Okay.
let's go back to the brioche question. Sorry.
So yes, yeah, we were talking about the
your
brioche
recommendation
question. So nobody got to hear me, but hopefully now you can. So there was a question about Pale, a member in the forum asked,
Yeah, that's for
something that they searched all over the internet looking for recommendations on what the best pre-ferment is to use for a rich brioche dough. And they couldn't find anything, and we're asking, should they be using a sponge, a biga, or a poolish? And generally speaking, I would say Polish and Biga are used mostly for doughs where you want more of a fermented sour flavor. With a Polish, the more liquid your sponge in that sense, the more sour notes you're going to get. The Biga gives you a milder, more fermented note. A friend of mine refers to it as like a beer flavor. Whereas for something like a brioche, a short sponge would be the most appropriate. In the pan bread industry, sponges are used anywhere from 4 to 8 hours most of the time. In my apprenticeship, we did a short half hour, a 30-minute sponge, just to start with the sugar, the liquids, and some of the flour to let the flour hydrate well so you can develop the gluten. And this pre-ferment with rich doughs is to help the yeast multiply, and it's not so much about flavor. The other ones are about flavor. In this case, with this rich brioche type doughs or sweet doughs, is the more sugar you have, the more yeast you need to use, and or more pre-ferment you want to do. So you might do a 3-4 hour pre-ferment if it's like more than 12% sugar in it, in baker's percent. And so that is kind of
what do most wholesale bakeries use? A sponge?
Sponge, yeah. Most are sponge and dough.
How long are those sponges usually?
Most of them are around that I have been, the ones that I've had opportunity to be in is around 4 hours. Right?
That's what I thought.
And they use the large sponge troughs, right? And
Right.
it's a fairly soft sponge. I wouldn't call it liquid, but it's fairly soft.
Yeah. And then we did talk about, let's go to the next question, which was really the sugar cookie bloom. Do you suspect that a cookie going paler over shelf life is due to blooming?
It can be either sugar bloom or it can also be starch retrogression.
Okay.
So it's also formula dependent a little bit in that sense. If it's sugar bloom, it's usually more freckled in a sense, so that it'll look almost like, some people will mistaken it for mold, because it looks like little white spots on the cookie. The starch retrogression is usually also a sign maybe that there's not enough sugar in the cookie, or not enough inverted sugar like corn syrup or molasses or something like that to help keep the cookie soft. Because then the starch crystallizes too easily, it's a retrograding of the starch, and that is essentially your cookie going stale, right? So it'll also taste quite stale if it is starch retrogression. So you'll get that kind of note as well.
That's true. And I also advise bakers and product developers to really check out their water activity. So go to the water activity page and check that out. Make sure that your water activity is low enough to avoid any kind of oxidative effects on the cookie.
Yeah. It can be fat bloom that way sometimes
also,
too.
Yeah, if it's kind of a bloom, Mark, don't you think emulsifiers would help?
Yes, often they will. Yeah.
What kind of emulsifiers would you use?
There it's somewhat formula dependent again. If it is a very high fat based cookie, something like monodiglycerides is usually a little bit better. If it is lower in fat, but still has quite a bit of sugar in it, then SSL, sodium stearoyl lactylate, usually works a little bit better.
Interesting that you'll use SSL.
Yeah, I found it quite bizarre. We stumbled on it back in the late 90s, kind of also, and with a customer I was working on for his cakes. And then because it worked so well in the cakes, we decided to try it in the cookies. And if they're lower fat type formulations, SSL seems to work quite well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How about lecithin? Have you tried lecithin in this instance?
Lecithin is very good in cookies. These days, there's essentially 3 choices in lecithin other than your egg yolks. And that is usually most commonly soy, sun, and canola lecithin. So there, it's going to depend on what your end cookie looks like visually as far as color, as well as taste, and then availability. Sunflower is very high in demand for clean label these days, and it's hard to find. And when you can find it, it tends to be expensive. The other non-GMO clean label lecithin that is available is canola lecithin, or also rapeseed lecithin. And the difference is that the canola lecithin tends to be much darker in color, and it has a slightly different flavor. It's not a bad flavor or anything, but it's just different. And some people don't always care for it. So it depends on the level you're using. You usually want to go not based on baker's percent with lecithin, but based on your fat. And so you only want to go between 2 to 4% of your fat with the lecithin is what you're looking at.
Cool. Let's talk about a discussion on cell elongation.
Okay.
Remember that?
That was Stevens, Mr. Pikes. That was from Caliber. They are the C-cell people.
Hosting. Appreciate your expertise on that.
Yeah.
Do you think he helped solve that question?
Let me see. So he's helped point towards some different, or that Luke has pointed out some different documentation. It increases the resilience and strength of the baked product. So yes, it gives you. He's helped answer that. But I would say to add in more detail is that what some of these fellows are looking for is that it is helping to give you that texture, that holding. And so we have some other members who also added and sharing their things and questions. So this is great. Awesome. And this is a great example of the forum in action. Because Mr. Pike, our sponsor from Caliber Control, who make the amazing C-cell instrument that does these images, right? And so it'll orient the dough to ensure all cell alignment with the loaf produces a product with a high number of cells with a narrow range of small diameters, right? So this means that you will get a nice performing loaf that has a nice even grain is what we look for. And in the past, before the C-cell instrument had been developed, basically these were highly skilled people who would look at a slice of bread and basically judge it as a 0 to 100.
Yeah.
And so, but then we also have another member then asking that, which level in the elongation are you talking about? And cell elongation confer from fermentation to initial. So, of course, what Mr. Pike is talking about is the cell elongation in the baked product, because that is where the C-cell takes the pictures. Is the this is essentially, instead of putting things onto a photocopier, which I've destroyed a few. And you only get so much information there, but then the C-cell does a phenomenal job at not only taking an image, but giving you data about that image, and telling you about the amount of cells and the elongation and everything. And so it's a very valuable tool, and it's used a lot in the milling industry now.
That's great. And I wanted to share that experience because this is an example of how a sponsor came on and helped this community, and we really appreciate the subject matter expertise from sponsors, and we encourage this form of interaction with the community. So if you're a sponsor and you have a solution to offer, please come on to the forums and just help out. Let's cover one more question. I have this. This one is really interesting to me, Mark. This one is from Mario and about the milk in pita bread. So I see that you offered up a really interesting solution. Can you talk a little bit more about why you provided that solution?
Well, Mario was looking for something to create what he calls a tourist pita. Now he's also reaching from his own personal background. Most of us familiar with pitas think of pitas that do not contain milk, that are very simple pitas. And what Mario enlightened me as well is that in his home country in Syria, that the high-end, the high-quality pitas do contain milk. And what that helps do is that helps to it helps in the emulsification of the dough. And it also is helping browning and richness and flavor, and it's keeping it nice and soft.
Wow.
So some of the things I've recommended he look at is initially in terms of why is the milk in there, just as those points that we talked about. And that's the first reason, is not just the flavor, but what is the functionality of the milk.
I really do think it's also like nutrition.
Yes.
Added nutrition, right?
It adds protein.
All these wonderful functionalities. Yeah.
And the thing is that it's the type of protein, because as we see so much about protein and foods today, what then becomes the next question is, how is that protein being declared on the package? If the protein is only being declared on the nutrition facts panel, you really don't know what kind or how much actual protein is there. If the protein is being declared on front of pack, then it has to meet a different set of criteria, because then the protein has to meet what is called, everybody refers to the PDCAS, which is an acronym, which is the Protein Digestibility Corrected Amino Acid Score. And so the simplified version of that is that, to digress here a little bit, is that albumin, egg white protein, is the best protein you can get. It is 100, or a score of 1, right? And everything compares to that. The proteins that are closest to albumin are milk protein at, I believe it's 0.8, and soy protein at 0.8. A lot of the others are much lower, like wheat protein, for example, is only 0.4. So if you have 10 grams of wheat protein, you're really only getting 4 grams of digestible protein. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's why putting something like milk in a pita for nutrition is important. Okay, it's not just any protein; it's highly digestible protein.
Exactly.
So that's why I wanted to expand on the background of that. And so because Mario talked about getting flavors in, he wanted that rich, creamy flavor.
Yeah.
And in a nice way, I kind of said, well, hold on a second. If you just put flavor in, you may not get the functionality. So he's working with a company out of Chicago who is sending him some dairy flavors that have also some functional parts to it. And I've also suggested that he also look at lecithinated soy flour. So he gets the emulsification properties, the digestible protein, and he gets some of the other functional benefits of the soy protein, the soy flour as well. Right?
That's awesome. And if you're a baker or a technical specialist listening to this live stream right now, and you know a whole bunch about pita, please join in the conversation.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, we all want to learn more.
Yeah, we all want to learn more. Like I wouldn't be able to contribute to this because I don't know too much about pita, and I know that Mark knows more than me. That's why, I brought Mark out of retirement for all you guys out there. So Mark, it is so wonderful to have your expertise and to have your extra point of view on our forums and how Bakerpedia runs. We are planning to be back here every Friday if both of us are not traveling. I don't think we're traveling anytime.
No.
But join us again. And if you miss us, please join us in the forums. And you have to be a Bakerpedia Academy member to join in the forums, and membership is free. So sign up today. Bakerpedia.com/forums. Thank you all. Thanks for coming.
You.
Thanks,
Bye.
Mark. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.